latest development in the Russia-Ukraine war, Reuters reported on April 11th that U.S. Special Envoy Steve Witkoff has told President Donald Trump that giving Moscow ownership of 4 occupied Ukrainian regions will be the fastest way to achieve a ceasefire. The Reuters report cited 2 unnamed U.S. officials and 5 other undisclosed sources, according to Reuters. Witkoff conveyed this proposal to Trump after meeting with Russian envoy Kirill Dmitriev in Washington in early April, a break with normal security procedures. Witkoff had invited Dmitriev, the Russian envoy, who is under U.S. sanctions following Russia's invasion, to his personal residence for dinner before the White House meeting. The move set off alarms inside the White House and the State Department. U.S. officials avoid hosting officials from Russia, which has sophisticated intelligence capabilities in their homes. The Reuters report came as Witkoff met Russian President Vladimir Putin in St. Petersburg to discuss a possible path toward a settlement in Ukraine. On April 11th, Putin had a meeting with Witkoff at the Presidential Library in St. Petersburg, which lasted for more than 4 hours. It was held behind closed doors and ended at about 10 p.m. Moscow time. The key topic was the situation in Ukraine. According to Reuters sources, Trump administration officials are increasingly divided on how to break the deadlock in Russia's war against Ukraine, with Witkoff and U.S. Special Envoy Keith Kellogg disagreeing on the best course forward. Kellogg has argued that Ukraine would never agree to cede total ownership of the territories to Russia unilaterally. Witkoff has claimed that the majority of people in Ukraine's Russian-occupied territories have participated in referendums and indicated that they want to be under Russian rule. Donetsk, Luhansk, Zaporizhzhia, Gir, and Kherson became part of Russia following referendums held there from September 23 to 27, 2022. Crimea and Sevastopol became part of the country after a referendum held in March 2014 that Putin said at a meeting with senior foreign ministry officials in June 2024 that Moscow was ready to resolve the conflict in Ukraine. His terms included Ukraine recognizing the Donetsk People's Republic and the Luhansk People's Republic, as well as the Kherson and Zaporizhzhia regions as parts of Russia. Meanwhile, Donald Trump's special envoy to Kyiv, General Keith Kellogg, suggested that Ukraine could be partitioned like Berlin after the Second World War, as Russia continues to hold out on accepting a truce. Kellogg appeared to suggest the country could be split into zones of control with British and French troops as part of a reassurance force in the west and Moscow's forces in the east. Between them would be Ukrainian forces and a demilitarized zone. But the U.S. would not provide any ground forces, he claimed. You could almost make it look like what happened with Berlin after World War II, when you had a Russian zone, a French zone, and a British zone. Kellogg also proposed creating an 18-mile demilitarized zone in eastern Ukraine along the current front line to act as a buffer between Russian and Western troops. You look at a map and you create, for lack of a better term, a demilitarized zone. Take both sides back up 15 kilometers each. That's 8 miles. And you have a DMZ that you can monitor, and you've got this no-fire zone. You can monitor that pretty easily. Keith has not yet commented on the remarks. However, Moscow has repeatedly insisted it would not accept peacekeeping troops from any NATO country under any conditions in Ukraine. General Kellogg's suggestion would mean Ukraine giving up on regaining its eastern territories that are now under Russian control. But it was unclear whether he was suggesting Kyiv cede to Russia any further territory east of the river. However, on April 12th, Kellogg denied that he suggested partitioning Ukraine. He further said that the Times misrepresented his words. The Times article misrepresents what I said, that I was speaking of a post-ceasefire resiliency force in support of Ukraine's sovereignty. In discussions of partitioning, I was referencing areas or zones of responsibility for an allied force without U.S. troops. I was not referring to a partitioning of Ukraine. reported on April 11th that ongoing talks between Kyiv and Washington on securing a critical minerals deal continue to be tense, with a source familiar with the discussion describing the negotiating atmosphere as very antagonistic. According to a source who spoke to Reuters, tensions surrounding negotiations stem from the Trump administration's proposal for extensive control over Ukraine's natural resources through a joint investment fund, which is larger than initially proposed, describing the more expensive proposal as maximalist. The source added that it was unlikely a new round of technical talks will lead to a breakthrough in negotiations. The long-running negotiation, which has already strained ties between Kyiv and Washington, follows an attempt to finalize a framework agreement earlier this year. Russian Foreign Ministry spokeswoman Maria Zakharova said that the United States tried to take advantage of Ukraine's Vladimir Zelensky with a minerals deal and now seems to have turned its back on him. The Russian official recounted in her Telegram channel how former U.S. Secretary of State Antony Blinken had confirmed that Zelensky himself had offered the United States access to Ukrainian natural resources in exchange for more military assistance. Just look how disgusted Zelensky's curators are with him now, and they do not even try to hide their contempt. They have used him and are now wiping their dirty and blood-covered hands off him. The minerals deal previously fell apart because of a verbal spat between Zelensky and Trump in the White House on February 28th. On March 27th, Kyiv announced receiving a revised deal, one which was much tougher on Ukraine than the previous one. The latest proposal demands all of Ukraine's revenues from natural resources as repayment for aid worth some $120 billion that Washington has provided to Kyiv. The United States will control an investment fund to help Ukraine's recovery as part of the deal. Since then, Ukrainian officials have repeatedly stated that they are still reviewing the terms, while Zelensky has complained that Washington has changed the original terms of the agreement. Trump has accused Zelensky of trying to back out of the deal, threatening him with big problems.